Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me for the 2023 Virginia Division B and C Coaches Clinic. My name is Emily Owens, and I am the State Director of Virginia Science Olympiad. And this is session 2, where we're going to go over our events for the season and how to read event rules and help our students prepare for these events. But you're actually not going to hear too much from me this hour because we have Karen Emmons with us, who has many titles, but I felt like I had to pick just one to put on the slide, and I picked National Event Supervisor, but you may know her as our previous state director. She's also the VASO treasurer and does a lot of things for us, wears a lot of hats for VASO, but she is a national event supervisor and is very knowledgeable about build events. And so she's going to be talking about those with you all today. So I'm going to do a really brief overview of some basic rule stuff and then pretty quickly turn it over to her for what I think is the most important part of the Coaches Clinic training, because build events have so much detail to them. So I know we have a mix of new and experienced coaches in this session. So we are going to do a little bit at the front end for our new coaches. So experienced coaches, please sit tight and patiently await Karen's segment. So we're going to look through some event stuff from our website. Again, most everything we talk about today you can access from our website, which is another one of Karen's hats, that she is in charge of our website. So let's take a look. Here we are on our main landing page. If you go to middle and high school, we have a page for events. And on this page, you can sort by division. Very helpful if you only coach for one particular division. And we have a link to where you can download the rules. So most of the event rules are in the national rule book. You can click that link, it'll take you to the national website and you will download it there. Here's one important thing to note. You cannot post these national rules on a public facing page. So if you have something like Blackboard or some other like protected site like Schoology, like you can post them there, but they should not be publicly accessible anywhere other than National's website. They're very particular about this, and so just want you to be aware of that. Also, though, it's important that you make this information easily accessible to your students, whether they know to go to our website to find this link, or it's posted on your team site. But your students shouldn't have to hunt for the rules on their own. They're free to download. There's just like a quick little form you have to fill out. And so it's really important that you either post it on that secure Blackboard kind of site, or direct your team to go here and access the rules, because if they try to search for them on their own, they may end up getting the wrong year. And even though it may look initially like some of the events have the same title, there are changes made every year. And we want to make sure that they have the correct rules for this year's tournaments. Okay. Just to kind of briefly show you what it's like on our website before I go into the actual rule book, if you click on any event, we do have a page for that, which just has some brief information. And for most of them, like I said, the rules location is the national rule book. Karen will be talking more about clarifications and impound and I'll talk about eye protection. But every event has a page, and there are also resources posted for many of those events. So this is a good reference page to start for coaches and for students. One that I want to highlight, though, and I talked about this as a substituted event, is experiment and data analysis for regionals. And just so that you know, when you click that, you can then access the VASO rules for this event. This event is not in the national rule book because we are substituting it. And these rules are actually slightly modified from last year as well. Our event supervisors took a close look and decided they wanted to make some changes. So those rules for that regional tournament are posted here. But let's take a look at the Nationals rulebook. Again, I'm going to use Division B as an example, just because most people here are Division B. Division C people, replace Crime Busters with forensics in your head, or as we talk about this. Here's our Division B rules manual. Note, it says 2023, very important, right? That we have the correct year. And again, I got this from I had to fill out the form to get the rules to access this. So there is some general information in the front of the rule book, but most, if not all of that, is stuff that we also cover in our own literature. So the main thing I'm going to focus on here is just how to read a general rule page. We're going to talk a little bit about calculators and goggles, and then, like I said, we'll do building events. You'll notice that there are events in bold. These are events that are new this year. They are replacing other events that have gone away. And then, just as we scroll through, there are different event types they're categorized into, that, just to kind of think about the similarities, where some are just written only tests, some have a hands-on component if they're in person. Obviously, those build events are going to be super important that we talk about. And then there are some that have both a physical device as well as a written test. But let's take a look at anatomy very, very briefly, just to show you as I'm scrolling through that even though anatomy is an event that's always here, year to year, doesn't go away, it has bold stuff in it too, right? Because it changes the body systems that are covered in that event. So even if an event itself is not overall bold in the table of contents, doesn't mean that there aren't changes. But for the sake of time, I'm going to start with Crime Busters. Here we go. All right. Crime Busters is one of our hands-on events that is actually going to take place on the hands-on date, because there's a lot of physical testing of different samples. But it does obviously also have a written part in terms of they are writing their answers on paper. So every rules sheet has the same general setup, where it will give you the overall description of the event, just a brief, 1 or 2 sentence insight into what this event is. So Crime Busters, they're going to be busting crime. They're going to be given a scenario, some evidence, some suspects. They have to perform a series of tests and then use the evidence to solve a crime. Then after the description, this row right here is going to be one of the most important rows for a coach preparing for signing events, and then also collecting stuff that they might have to bring to a tournament. It says a team of up to 2. There are some events, very few, where there are 3 people allowed in an event. It would say that there if there were 3. Most are 2. So this is a team of 2 who can compete in this event. And then it says eye protection, and it says C. This means that students will have to bring goggles to this event, and they are of a particular type of goggle. And I will show you where in the rule book we can find that information. But effectively, this is going to be chemical splash goggles that are indirectly vented. There may be other information there for different events, such as Impound, but that will vary, obviously, whether it's a build event or not. You then have your event parameters, which is going to also have some key information about what students are allowed to bring or are required to have. So Crime Busters allows a cheat sheet, basically. Each participant, it may say participant, it may say team. You have to make sure that you read carefully to know what's allowed for each student or for each pair. Each participant may bring a sheet of paper. It gives some parameters about what that paper how it can be modified. And it also says that they can bring one standalone, non-programmable, non-graphing calculator. There is also a guide in here that I will show you about the different types of calculators for different events, because some events don't allow a calculator at all. Some allow only 4 functions, some allow scientific, some allow effectively a graphing calculator. It depends, and we have to be prepared based on the particular event. And then there are sometimes additional materials that an event may need. Crime Busters is one of those, where they have a list of recommended lab equipment that students should bring to be able to perform the chemical tests of the event. Okay. And I'll show you that whole list. Okay. Even though it said eye protection up here, other events, namely our chemistry events, also have additional safety, regulations that are listed under event parameters, right? So in this paragraph, participants must wear goggles, an apron or a lab coat, and have skin covered from the neck down to the wrist and toes. Pants should be loose fitting. So that means like no leggings. Shoulder length or longer hair has to be tied back. All of that is super crucial so that students can participate in the actual like lab components of the event. In fact, they won't be allowed in if they do not meet this criteria for this particular event. Again, not all events have this, right? This is a lab-based event. Your written tests, you don't have to wear goggles or bring an apron for. You just need a pencil and whatever else, it says for a cheat sheet. But very important that coaches are aware of this, because you're often the ones that have to like pack the goggles and the lab coats or aprons to bring to a competition. The rest of this is then parameters around what the event will be. So what is the competition? What am I doing in this event? Okay. For something like Crime Busters, it tells you what types of things you may be testing, what kind of samples, how many different things you could be asked to do. This area will also include information about like, not just what is covered in the event, but if there's any things that are like only covered at the state tournament or only covered at the national tournament. You can see that here in the different levels, that there are different numbers of samples that are given depending on the level of competition. And then the list continues in terms of here are the types of things that they should be able to do, or the topics that your students can study. So it's very, very helpful for coaches to, of course, be familiar with the like specific physical items that events need, but students should be aware of this as well, on top of reading the rules for themselves to understand everything that goes into an event. They are responsible ultimately for the information that's on this page. There are sometimes sample questions and activities provided, but of course that's a very small list and, is not meant to be something that's going to be required, that they're going to have to, answer this question and it's going to be on every test or something like that, just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that could be asked. And then at the end of every set of rules, it tells you how it will be scored. So for an event like Crime Busters, different sections have set worth to the overall score. And our build events also then have very detailed like rubrics basically as to how they are scored. Okay. So I'm going to show you then at the end of the document, the most important part of this comparison here, or like looking at these rules, is like the calculator and goggle and lab equipment guide. So they're all the way at the end. You can also find them in the table of contents. There are some trial events listed at the end of the rule book. Just know that those are trial events. Those are optional events that could have been run by different organizations. We're not running them, or at least, just compare it basically to our document. And I will show you that table again at the end here. But here is the chemistry recommended lab equipment. So this document is, of course, specific to Division B because it's in the Division B rules, but Division C also has one because of events like environmental chem lab, forensics will require equipment as well. So each team can bring any or all of the items listed below, and basically saying like, if you don't have these, you're not going to be able to do, at least some of these, you're not going to be able to do most of what the event is. And so we kind of think of this as like, you're going to be making a box that they can carry with them to their hands-on day to be able to do these tests. Right. And so wherever there's an X, make sure you're reading for the right event. It tells you what they are allowed to bring. Now, it doesn't tell you like how many, like it just says 50 milliliter beakers. You could theoretically bring as many as you wanted. this can seem like an overwhelming list, right? That seems like a lot of X's. If your team is able to actually practice doing these chemical tests, in a session after school, then you can actually streamline or help them to streamline, like, here are the things that they actually will use, right? Thinking about my own teams in the past, like for forensics, which is the counterpart to Crime Busters, if they're practicing it enough, they kind of start to develop their own preferences in terms of, like, I want to do this test in this test tube, I want to do it in a well plate. I don't want to do it in a beaker. Here's what works for me, basically, so that you don't have to bring this entire list if you don't want to. And that's just, I think, generally good advice anyway, is to, like, have your team members have the opportunity to practice with these chemical tests, because if they haven't practiced at all and they just bring this entire box of equipment, they're not going to know how to use any of it anyway. So this is a guide not just really for tournaments, but also then for you as a coach, like for practices of, what can I give them to start with when we're learning how to test whether something is cornstarch or not. And so you can see it's also quite different than the other events. So Crime Busters has very different things allowed as compared to Can't Judge a Powder. So it's not like one box necessarily would work for both lab events if a student is in both of them. Like, I can't bring graduated cylinders to Crime Busters, just like I can't bring slides and cover slips to Can't Judge a Powder. So you would likely need two different sets. But again, this is in the back of the rule book, and so you can kind of create that kit early and then have them use it and figure out what needs to stay, or what they know how to use, what they feel comfortable with. After that, we have our calculator page. There's 2 pages in this rule book for this, kind of describing generally, like, what the different types of calculators are. In the Crime Busters example, it said, standalone, non-programmable, non-graphing calculator, I think. And so that would be like this one here, right? Like a scientific calculator, basically. So they give you a picture to kind of help, with the frame of reference. It's not one of the graphing calculators that you see many students have. But these are the different classes of potential calculators. And there's a nice little table right after that of the type of calculator allowed by an event. So it indicates where there are no calculators allowed, and then the 3 major classes. Class 4, I want to point out, is like laptop, phone, tablet, smartwatches. No event allows those. So I know in my classroom, I always have kids asking, like, can I use my phone as a calculator? The answer in Science Olympiad is no. So just make sure that they're aware of that. After that, we also have our eye protection guide. So not every event requires eye protection, but our lab events, a lot of our build events do. And there are specific categories to the types of goggles permitted. We have categories A, B, and C, and they are different. Okay, now it is possible to get a pair of goggles that meets all the criteria and they could wear them for all the events. But they have to have very specific designations on them. And so the part that I want to draw your attention to is the corresponding ANSI designation required marking. Okay. Category A goggles have a different designation than category B. And then category C is also different. This designation, most importantly, is for impact rating, right? So category B goggles for some of our events like Bridge require high impact safety goggles. And so this rating is one of the main things that we look for when we see the students at hands-on day and want to evaluate that they, have the right goggles. Okay. So category C is what was in Crime Busters. And like I mentioned, those are going to be like your chemical splash protection goggles that have to seal tightly to their face, make a nice little line around their eyes, and have to be indirectly vented. If you are not sure what that means, you honestly can probably find examples online, but like, I work in a classroom, my county provides me indirect vent chemical splash protection goggles that actually are also impact rated. So I would start there for schools, because more often than not, if schools have goggles, they're going to at least cover category C, if not also B. But that is your guide for that. All right. I think that's the gist of just like the lay of the land for rules. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen, who's going to tell you all about build events, because there's a lot more to it with all of that. One last thing though I want to mention in terms of like the cheat sheets and stuff like that, I know that that can feel like an overwhelming list to keep track of, because you guys are going to be proctoring for written test day. Last year we provided a proctor guide that kind of had like a list of what everyone was allowed to have in front of them, and we will do the same thing again this year. So we will compile that for you, but it is also helpful for you to look over the rules yourselves. But now to Karen.
Thank you, Emily. Let me share my screen now, and we'll get started about the building events. As she said, my name is Karen Emmons. I have been a national event supervisor for several years now in a variety of events. I'm also actually the author of several of the physics events, and with my husband and a couple other people, we also coordinate all the technology and physics events for VASO. So I want to start with, I know we have a variety of new and expert coaches here for this section because people always want to hear about events. I'm going to start with some new stuff, but I've got some significant important things to say at the end about the build events, in specific ones about the events. So hang in there, we'll get there for that if you're an expert coach. But I do want to highlight the Let's Chat series. I hope all of you have heard about it. I know Emily's been talking about it. It is going to give us the schedule for that. You can find that on our website on the Division BC page. If you scroll down, that gives you the specific schedule in the calendar. Also, you can see the summary schedule of it. And this tells you where you can sign up. You can also submit questions ahead of time. We would welcome your questions ahead of time. We'll make sure that we address all of them. Please make sure that they are questions about the events that we're doing in Let's Chat. We've been receiving some about Crime Busters. I don't know anything about those kinds of events, so we won't be answering questions about other events, but we're really excited about this. It takes the place of the building event open house that we had in the past, where and the advantage of this is we can do a really deep dive one at a time, giving us time to lay out each event carefully. It's easier for the event supervisor to do it as a Q&A with another people. So we'll have kind of a 2 or 3 experts talking together about the event, and then anybody live can submit questions, can ask questions, and we will record it and put it on the event pages. So it's on Wednesday nights at 7:30 and Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. I want to also, I know Emily pointed out the resources. There are so many resources out there, and kids will start Googling, but please don't forget to look at the VASO event pages too. We actually have been really working hard to bring really good resources onto these pages. We've refreshed all of it, and we'll continue adding to it. I want to point out, I know we have a lot of B coaches here. I want to point out the Crave the Wave page, where we have, a friend has made a whole series of classes that we've put on here that the kids can watch about waves. And then we've got some national SO notes and things like that. I'm going to point out, if we have any C coaches, Wi-Fi Lab. The resources on Wi-Fi Lab are significant and really, really important. So if you're Division C coach, you've got kids doing Wi-Fi Lab. We don't do the Let's Chat Wi-Fi Lab towards the end of December, but one of the reasons we did that is because we have such good resources on our webpage. So please do check that out. All right, going to talk about clarifications. You can see in each event spot, we have a spot for clarifications. Clarifications, I trust by now you've heard this many times before, but I'll say it again. VASO only clarifications in VASO events. So you have to keep an eye on the clarifications we publish. They're critically important. And sometimes, you know, and just because you see something show up in an FAQ or in clarifications and nationals, if we have it adopted, it is not valid in VASO tournaments. Sometimes if we're so opposite, then we actually will publish a clarification that is in opposition of something that nationals is doing. We have done that in Scrambler this time around, and I'll talk about that when I talk about Scrambler. You'll also, this is also where you see information like ceiling heights show up, or room dimensions, or the maximum for Wi-Fi lab, or any of that kind of information. So you'll find that in the clarifications too. So they are continually changing. You can see this page is under the middle and high school, so it has all of them on there. You can choose just one event if you want. Or, you know, so you could, and if you don't like the event, you could just reset the page. You could choose all the Division B clarifications. So it's all there. Please look at them. And I will talk about a few of them, but it's not just in building events. There's an astronomy one that corrects the topics. There's a rocks and mineral one that corrects the topics. So check them out, please. All right, I'm just trying to go through because I want to spend more time on the really interesting things, but please put questions in the chat if I'm not covering something in enough detail. The next thing that I would like to talk about is the use of kits, the pros and cons of kits. All right, kits, there are a lot of kits out there, and I want to talk frankly about them. So in the ESO store, and in your rules, there's an organization called WARDS, and that is linked to National Science Olympiad. You can find in your rule book on the second page at the bottom of it, a coupon for WARDS. So if you want to use them, there's a coupon there to make one big giant order from your school. You can only use it once, I believe, but it is there for kits. But people use a variety of resources to prepare for events, you know, libraries, internet, tests found online, and some people choose to order these resources. Now, I can understand the appeal about kits. I'm going to stop sharing here so you can just listen to me talk for a minute. I can understand the appeal about kits. But kits, I want you to understand what kits are for. What is the role of kits? Kits are intended to start you off on an event. So just purchasing a kit doesn't guarantee a medal. All right, and that's very true of the WARDS kits, because I know how they're put together. They are intended to be an introduction to get you started off, to get you going with some basic materials that you are expected to alter, work with, fix. Just because a kit says Science Olympiad on it does not mean it is compliant with this year's rules. Please double check all kits, even those that are certified for Science Olympiad. This has even been a problem in WARDS. All right. So last year they had the wrong color LED for detector building. So check them out. Kits can be pricey. When compared to just purchasing materials separately, you know, kits can vary, and kits can vary greatly in price too. It's not required, if you want to look at kits, it is not required to use WARDS. All right. Kits can get back ordered. And this has been a big issue also with a team that doesn't start any work on their events, on their building events, and they order a whole bunch of kits and they wait for them to come in and they wait for them to come in and they wait for them to come in, and it's the second week in January and they still haven't come in. I've seen many teams get flummoxed when it barrels down to the tournament and they're still waiting for the kits. All right. You can look to see what's in a kit. They'll have a list of materials and look to see if it's really worth it to you, right? It costs more to buy them in a kit than it does to buy things separately. Many teams do well without kits. And I want to say all of that. Now, the best event for kits, I think there is one event that is primo for kits, all right? And that is flight, the flight event. I think you'll hear consensus on that in the coaching roundtable too, in the next session. Now, of course, VASO is not running regional level flight event, so it's not really pertinent yet, but those are very solid and generally kind of needed. All right, so that's what I want to say at KIT. But again, teams can do quite well without kits. So I encourage you to evaluate your purchases carefully. There's one more thing about kits, and I'm going to talk about that in the context of a more global policy issue in VASO. All right. The issue is building, the kids need to build their own device. And on the surface of that, that seems like an obvious statement. But it's an issue in surprisingly many ways. And I want to show you some of the, so obviously they need to be building at home. Science Olympiad is a kids hands-on, parents hands-off activity, right? And I'm going to show you now, let me share my screen again. I'm going to go to the construction policy. This is a policy that you all should look at, and you should have your parents look at. There's nothing here on the website that the parents can't look at too, right? Again, it's under middle and high school, and there's policies. There's all these policies here. They're all useful, interesting to see. Parent participation is a great one for you all to hand out to the parents. It talks about what can and should parents do and what should parents not do. So that's a great resource for you to hand out to the parents of the kids on your team, for them to understand what is in bounds and what is not in bounds. But let's take a look at the construction policy in particular. All right, so it says the devices have to be constructed only by members of the 15 student team, all right? Now that means that, you've got 2 kids working on bridge or wheeled vehicle or, sounds of music, but other kids from the 15-person team can help as long as it's just somebody on the team. But mentors, the parents are absolutely prohibited from constructing any part of the device that is presented for judging. But by all means, I have been a parent of 3 students in this who've all done building events. Watch them like a hawk, teach them to use tools, demonstrate on something that's not going into the device, help them learn the skills, help them learn safe and proper usage of the tools. So they need to design their devices so they can build it safely themselves. All right. An issue in this, and this is often a problem in Division C, but you sometimes see it in Division B events, using old devices. All right, so events usually stick around for 2 years, right? Wi-Fi Lab's in its 2nd year, Storm the Castle, Trajectory are in their 2nd year. Even if it looks like a device can be used from a previous year, unless it is the same student who built it the previous year on your team, using it and modifying it, it should not be used. So this is something that trips up a lot of schools, right? They keep these around, but you can't, if you've held last year's Trajectory or Wi-Fi Lab or something device, you have to be thoughtful as you pass it on to the new students that are using it. You're giving them a device that was not built by someone on their team. Now they can use it as a model. They can use it for inspiration. They can use it to learn from it. They can take it apart for parts, but they can't use it as is unless the student who built it before is still on the team. And for those of you that are fielding multiple teams, we mean the exact team, not, the device went to this team and Johnny and Susie who built it are on another one of your teams. Division C coaches, I'm going to talk to you directly for a moment. The code in detector building is part of the build. They can't take last year's code and present it as theirs unless they worked on it last year. They also can't share code between the teams from the same school. They can't just download code from the internet. there's a clarification that VASO will be requiring a copy of their code to be submitted. And we look at it with a fine-toothed comb. If they can find it on the internet, we can too, right? It is a part of the device that will be evaluated, and will be evaluated after they're done presenting their device at the hands-on day. In Scrambler, again, Division C, there is a clarification that we're not allowing teams from the same school to share a launching device. In Nationals, they are allowing that. So Nationals has an FAQ about that, but we are explicitly not allowing it. We see the launching device as an integral part of the build, and team members need to design and build that in conjunction with their device. So I think you all have the idea on that. I'm not going to keep beating that to death. But then let's talk about kits and digital fabrication as part of this, right? So we have a section in this policy about the use of kits, and note the wording about kits. VASO takes this seriously. Teams are encouraged to design and construct their own customized devices, but they can use kits as long as those kits are substantially modified. We learn, we prepare for the tournaments, and we know what kits are out there. We will be talking to kids to understand what is the substantial modification on their device. Now, a substantial modification is a structural modification. So something about how it works, how it functions, not changing the color. You know, it would be adding gearing or changing the braking system. It isn't enough to take a kit to build a wheeled vehicle and just add a dowel to it for the timing mechanism. That's not really a structural modification. All right. So if the device was made from a kit, expect the event supervisor to ask kids about what modifications they made to the kit. And in fact, we have some clarifications on this in roller coaster. I want you to see this clarification. If a kit was used to build the team's device, and there are a lot of roller coaster kits out there that are aimed specifically at Science Olympiad, the design log, remember in the rules for a build event, there's design logs. We'll look at those in a minute. The design log must also include an explanation of at least one substantial modification made to the kit as required by the constructed devices policy. So we're going to ask for that in writing. It's actually a kindness that we're doing that. We've discovered that kids get very flustered when they're asked about this. So this is something that they can prepare for and put down on paper and have words for that we can discuss with them at tournament. This clarification appears in roller coaster. It appears in Scrambler, because there are a lot of vehicle events, and it appears in wheeled vehicle. So be prepared for that. Going back to our build policy, so let's talk about digital fabrication. Same idea. It's not surprising. Now, given all I've said, I'm sure that you can see where we're going. We're looking to make sure that students have done substantial work if they use digital fabrication. And by that, we mean 3D printing, laser cutting, CNC mills. Think about it. So our emphasis here is on students building their device. And 3D printing is becoming more and more common and could be a tremendous tool for people to use if they wish to. It also is not required for success. Absolutely is not. But you know, think about, could we say it was really a student's device? If they go to the internet, they find a file for a penny whistle, they download it, push print, and voila, here is their sounds of music instrument. Right. So I think you can see the push and the pull that we've got going here. So all of the kits policy. Now, information about 3D printing, again, I'm going to show you a specific building event rules, but in the design log for all of the building events, it is required that students, if they do any digital fabrication, to submit information about it. And so we And they should expect questions about what they did with the digital fabrication. They're welcome to show us a before and after rendering in their log. Anything, but they should, when they fill out their log, when they talk about the digital fabrication, they should be thinking about the question, what did I do with this? I'm going to show what I did with this, how I altered it, what I did with this. So again, it's the same basic idea using in the 3D printing. We do have an exception though. Digital fabrication, we don't care if it's a little minor part of the device, it's a hinge or a bracket. We don't need to, they'll want to mention it briefly in the design log that they used it, but we don't need the same whole discussion. We consider that the equivalent of going out and buying a hinge or a bracket. It's a small little part of the device. We don't expect any significant alterations to it. Though I will say that a lot of teams that do use a 3D print a hinge or a bracket or something like that do all the CAD work because they expect, because they're trying to fit it specifically in a device and they can't find an over-the-counter hinge or whatever. I have spent a lot of time on that topic. And the reason is because it's important, right? It's kind of a smushy, VASO takes this seriously. And we will not be returning logs to teams in any event. The students should always turn in their logs, charts, and graphs, a copy of them, because we will be keeping them so that we can refer to them later to compare to the internet, or even teams from the same school. We do all of that work. So we want to be upfront about what it is we're evaluating, what it is we're looking for. Does anybody have any questions on that before I go to building rules in general? Okay. All right, so let's go on to, I'm going to share the screen and we're going to take a look briefly at Bridge as a template for looking at a lot of building event issues. So Emily has talked about safety, and this is one of the events that I think safety is the most important in. If the event requires goggles, test with goggles on. Get the kids used to wearing those goggles, to working with those goggles. Try to recreate the competition conditions as closely as possible. And in Bridge, I think this is, quite frankly, one of the riskiest things. If kids are not wearing those pieces of the bridge, they shatter everywhere. Right? There's a reason when we ask for goggles. You want to protect your students while they're practicing, please. All right. Now we've talked about, she's talked about how there's event parameters, what they're bringing. The teams can only bring one bridge, but there's always a section in the building event rules and like the chemistry rules and other ones, the event supervisor will provide, all right? So the event supervisor is providing the test apparatus and the tools for measurement and all of these things. So it's important when you look at the rules and when the students are figuring out how to make their thing, they think about what are they actually making and what is the event supervisor bringing. I'm emphasizing this because it's a surprising problem in Bridge every year. So the test apparatus here is in section 6. And so it talks about the base, it talks about the supports, it talks about a loading assembly. Every year we have teams come with a bridge that have built a loading assembly into their bridge, not recognizing that this is all part of what the event supervisor is bringing. And because our events are in person, that is indeed the case. You don't need to bring any of this stuff. And if it's built into the bridge, they will be expected to use our testing equipment too. So if it's built into the bridge, it means they can't test right. And it may even be an illegal bridge if the loading block, for example, is glued onto the bridge. So this is a surprisingly common problem. Also, in Wi-Fi lab was a problem last year. People would bring the whole test setup, and we are to provide the test setup. So have the students look carefully at that. Bridge, building event rules are always long and they're always complicated, right? These need to be read again, read as a group, have everybody talk about it. When I coached, we used to have a weekly reading of the rules, and I would have like little quizzes, and the kids would quiz each other so that they would know, because every time you read through it, you see something a little different, you read it, you become a lot more careful with it. Measuring. Teach kids to measure properly. Now, if you don't know for sure how to measure properly, you're sitting here and you're thinking, well, I'm not sure how to do that. Don't be embarrassed. A lot of people don't. But there are videos that are online that talk about how to measure properly. And I am a huge proponent of the burn an inch method. All right. There are videos online that talk about how to burn an inch, but what essentially it means is you don't start at the end of the ruler or the tape measure, because they are often distorted. Like a tape measure has that little metal claspy thing on the end, or like a lot of times and so you can't get a good measurement from the end. So you start at the 1 and you get a good solid measurement, and then you subtract 1 inch or 1 centimeter or whatever from it. That's called the burn an inch method. It's much more reliable. And again, you can read about it or see videos online about how to do it. In measuring, don't build right to the tolerance specified. So if something can be 30 centimeters big, build it to 29 3/4. All right, go a smidge on the safe side. It trips up students every year because they're not always good or careful about measuring, or things shift, or wood can warp or swell, not a lot, but a little. So make sure that students are, tell them not to go right up to the edge of it, because all too often they have, and they've not been careful enough, and it's just a little too big. And I'm going to talk about the consequences of that in a minute. I'm also going to give you actually a tip about 3D printing, which is, obviously you're not going to 3D print a bridge, but since they just require wood and glue. But just because you put dimensions into a CAD file doesn't keep you from having to check the measurements afterwards. I've seen 3D printed objects where there's a little rim on the finished product that the student didn't file off and didn't check, and that little rim made it out of compliance because they went to 30 centimeters, right? So 3D printers are not magic, and they're not infallible. Measure your things. Check the weights or dimensions of any pieces you'd buy. We once had a team that bought a weight that was labeled 2 kilograms for an event in which 2 kilograms was the max allowed. Unfortunately, the weight actually masked as more than that, right? The vendor selling it just wanted people to know that it was at least 2 kilograms, but they just wrote 2 kilograms on the package. The team bought it, they never checked it, and it was more than that. And so they didn't have a legal weight. So check, measure, weigh, be careful about these things. Build, test again. Help students figure out how to keep a log of their results. The log is an important part in all of these events. You're going to see here a design log. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I see I'm running tight on time. And I want to get to some of the other things that I wanted to talk about. Let's talk about tiers for a second. So some events have tiers. Bridge is one of these. Tiers, let's find it, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. What that means is every bridge that is classified as a Tier 1 bridge does better than a Tier 2 bridge. No matter how good the Tier 2 bridge was or how bad the Tier 1 bridge was, if it's Tier 1, it's still going to be in its category above Tier 2. So you can see this is the importance and why I say be a little bit careful about the measurements. Give yourself a little willy room. Well, because what puts a bridge outside of Tier 1? It's any construction parameters or competition parameter violations. So if any of those things happen, the bridge goes into tier 2. So the first goal is always tier 1, meeting the construction parameters as carefully as possible, which is why I talk about reading them, measuring carefully. So even if a tier 2 bridge holds all the weight and is very powerful, you know, but it's not a fully legal bridge, tier 1 will beat it even if it held almost nothing. What is a construction violation? What is a competition violation? In the rules, you see the section, the construction parameters are up here, defined construction parameters. Those are the things about how long can it be, how wide can it be, how tall can it be. You know, those are the construction parameters. A bridge that's not built out of wood would, you know, fail a construction parameter. A competition parameter would be something that happened down here in the competition, which is another reason why I talked to you about encouraging students, you know, help students test in, especially the young ones, so that they've practiced. What is it like, you know, what is going to happen when I go into the competition and I need to do this and this and this? Help them envision it as much as possible, so it doesn't take them aback. So a competition violation would be something they do that the bridge can be legal, but they do something wrong during the competition, and the judge will try to help them not do anything wrong, right? But like that would be, you know, maybe they leave to get other materials, or they communicate outside of the competition area, or they hold the bucket, they try to support the buckets so it doesn't break the bridge as fast. Those kinds of things, that would be a competition violation. All right, I'm gonna shift now because I'm having to go fast. I see I only have 8 minutes. I want to talk about impound for a minute. So impound is some events are impound, bridge is not, but it'll appear up at the top. It says impound no here, but impound is at the beginning of the competition day, which for you will be your whole session where you show up to hands-on day, is a time when teams go and turn their devices and their logs into the judge, right? They give it to them and then they don't get to touch it again until it's time to compete. And there's a lot of good reasons for impound. You know, it gives the judges a chance to begin the judging if there's a lot of measurements that have to be made. It keeps students from continuing to alter their device based on what they see other teams doing. So once that's turned in, and impound is a set period, once that's turned in, they cannot alter it. They don't get to go back. It's not it's not like a locker where they can go in and out. They turn it in and they leave it there till it's time. I'm sure Emily will talk more about impound as we get closer. All right, I'm moving along fast. I see there's a question. Okay, let's see. Will there be a recording of this meeting? Yes, there will be a recording. Yes, there will be a recording. It'll be on the website. And parents, I would encourage you to have parents watch this part, right? All mentors, parents, students, they are welcome to watch all of this. All right, I'm going to talk now because I'm trying to make sure that I get through, though Emily is kindly telling me I can go a little past 10 if I need to, but I'm trying to keep to the schedule. Everybody who's been listening in the background may now want to actually stop listening in the background, grab a pen and paper for this part. All right, I'm going to talk about some specific event highlights. Now, I can't do more than highlights because unless you have really kind of started to do a real dive into the rules, anything that I say that is really of significant depth is not going to make sense to you. But I'm going to say enough for you to be able to tell your students to listen to this, to look for this in the rules, and especially to come to Let's Chat, right? Because these are the highlights that we're starting to, as we start to do our own deep dives and start to prepare our Let's Chat sessions, these are the things that the tips and the errors and the things that we want to show to, these are some of the things that you're going to hear us talk about. So here are some specific highlights. Bridge. All right, let me stop sharing my screen again and I'll just talk. All right, so in Bridge, The metal supports, if you ever bought a bridge table setup from Pittsco, which is the common one that a lot of teams have bought from and used year after year, the metal supports that come with the Pittsco bridge test setup are not the right size for this year's rules. The size of the required supports this year is smaller. Now, in B, that doesn't really matter because of how those bridges are, but in Division C, it matters quite a bit because the bridges will be above in B, but they're going to go below the test level in C. And if those supports aren't right, you have to make an adjustment for that. During our Let's Chat, we will be addressing how to adjust for that or how to make a simple substitute. All right, so write that down as just a little note for something you need to be paying attention to. Detector building. Look at the clarifications. We ourselves were actually looking for information on what nationals understood about a load cell versus strain gauge. And we had some communication with nationals on that. It was good communication, and our understanding is posted as a clarification. So look at it, because the difference between load cells and strain gauges is a little intermingled. All right. Also, if you're doing detector and you find it as a scary bit, there are amazing tips coming in detector. I know it can be a scary event, but we have a real expert in this, and the tips are going to lay out how to start, the direction of thinking, and those should appear. She is committed to providing them before Thanksgiving, but I bet you, start looking for them in a couple of weeks. They will appear on the detector building page. It's about time. This is an event that's near and dear to my heart, since my husband and I are the national event supervisors for it. Students have to build a device that emits the same signal 3 times. When we say same, we mean same. The same thing doing the same thing, not 3 identical looking things. Those are not the same. We have posted a clarification about same and about the mechanism that introduces those signals and what has to be the same and what doesn't have to be the same. It's a very, very foundational clarification, and it's about time. So please read it and start looking ahead and for our It's About Time session that we'll do. Storm the Castle. Those devices can be bigger this year, right? They're going to be thrown further. So just as you are getting ready to do your practice sessions, beware of that. A common problem last year in Storm the Castle, the trebuchet has to sit in a box, a safety, not like a cardboard box. There will be a section taped off on the floor that the trebuchet has to sit in, that the device does, and the students have to stay outside of that, back behind, for safety, back behind the device. And then they have to trigger it, generally via a string that comes out behind the box. All right. Lots of teams last year did not make that string long enough. They thought, oh, it only has to be a meter, but we're going to put the device in the middle of the box, so maybe it can be less than a meter. And then they put the device at the front of the box, and then they needed more than a meter of string to be outside of the box, back behind it. I don't, if I'm not making perfect sense. And we had teams where we had to move the trebuchet back some because their string wasn't long enough for the kids to be able to get it, to set it off from back behind the trebuchet. The box is bigger this year. So it's going to be, because the devices are bigger, they're putting a bigger safety box around the trebuchet. Make sure, I know this seems silly, but it's actually a really big deal. Make sure that there's extra string, that there's enough. And this is one of those things that teams that have practiced and done it once, and tried real living conditions and maybe taped out a box like that themselves would begin to realize that their string's too short. All right, trajectory, division C, same deal with the string, okay? So I'm not gonna go through that again, but the first target is elevated in trajectory, and the way the scoring is, there is a huge incentive on the near target. It's the near target that's elevated, and if you don't land on that table at all, you get no score. So it is incentivizing hugely amount on the premium on hitting that first near target. The score is much bigger for it, and it's not a huge target. So we'll talk about that. So it is incentivizing accuracy on that part and the lob shot because it has to go up. Vehicle events. So let's see. Oh, I'm going over. Okay, just a couple more minutes. Vehicle events. In opposition to my huge emphasis on measuring correctly, we have a clarification about the dowels. The dowels have to be 1/4 inch dowels. We know that a dowel sold as a 1/4 inch dowel is not really a 1/4 inch. We know that. We will not judge harshly. You don't have to buy a 1/2 inch dowel or 1/2 inch dowel and try to lay the down to a 1/4 inch. We are reasonable. We know what it means to buy a 1/4 inch dowel. You can read that clarification. Scrambler, no bag for the eggs. All right, going to talk about that. We're going to do a session on Write It, Do It in Let's Chat. And we're going to talk about what to expect in doing the event in a virtual format and how to best practice for that. So those are some very fast highlights, but I hope that, that they get your kids to think about a few things that are, to get them started with some of these things. These are just some of the things that we're going to talk about. We'll talk about sourcing materials, best way to go about building. I'm very, very excited for this series, and we will start it with Bridge next Saturday. And that's what I have. Does anybody else have any quick questions for me before I turn it over for the next session? All right. A lot of information. This is why we have to do Let's Chat. There's just too much information to do in this session. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you so much, Karen. So yeah, another plug, just because that makes it, that's the best case to make for Let's Chat is there's a lot of information. Sign up to attend if you can live, submit your questions, please. More questions gives us a better idea of the things that are on people's minds when they're reading the rules, and you'll get better info from it. But if you can't attend live, they will be recorded and they'll be posted on our website and our YouTube channel. So please, please, please take advantage of that opportunity. That is going to be invaluable. Our third session, we will start here shortly, is a coaching roundtable where we have some veteran Division B and C coaches who are going to, open up the floor to questions and what's on your mind and things you may want to ask about. This will not be part of the recording because it's in breakout rooms, but we did want to acknowledge Anita and Leah. Thank you very much for giving your time today for this next session. So we'll pick back up on the recording in session 4 on Site Olympiad.